The elevator doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Tyson Fury stepped out, his massive 6'9" frame filling the narrow hospital corridor. He had just finished a grueling 2-hour promotional interview at the Manchester Media Centre, located conveniently next to the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. What should have been a simple exit had turned into an accidental detour when he'd pressed the wrong button in his post-interview fatigue, his mind still buzzing with questions about his upcoming fight and endorsement deals. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting an antiseptic glow across the polished linoleum floors that reflected the institutional green walls. Unlike the bustling adult wards he'd visited before for charity events, this floor carried a different energy, quieter, more fragile, weighted with an unspoken gravity that seemed to permeate every corner. Colorful murals of cartoon animals adorned the walls, bright attempts to mask the clinical reality of pediatric medicine, but they couldn't hide the underlying truth of this place. Tyson pulled out his phone to check directions back to the main entrance, scrolling through missed calls from his management team when he noticed a door slightly ajar. Room 214. The nameplate read, Greenwood E, in neat hospital handwriting. Through the gap he heard something that made him pause mid-scroll, a woman's voice, soft and melodic, singing what sounded like a lullaby. But there was something in that voice, a tremor that spoke of exhaustion, of hope fighting against despair, of a mother's desperate attempt to maintain normalcy in an abnormal situation. "Stay beside me, through the night," the voice continued, barely audible above the constant beeping of medical equipment and the distant sounds of hospital life, nurses discussing medication schedules, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the muffled conversations of other families facing their own battles. Curiosity overrode protocol and common sense. Tyson took a careful step closer to the doorway, not intending to intrude but drawn by something he couldn't quite identify, perhaps the same instinct that had guided him through countless boxing matches, the ability to sense when something significant was happening. What he saw through the narrow opening stopped him cold and made his breath catch in his throat. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, lay propped up in a hospital bed that seemed to dwarf his small, fragile frame. His skin held the pallor that Tyson recognized from his own difficult moments, the color of someone fighting a battle that couldn't be won with fists or strategy or determination alone. The child's fingers clutched a worn teddy bear, its brown fur faded from countless nights of comfort, one ear slightly torn and carefully stitched back together with what looked like loving, inexpert hands. Beside the bed sat a woman with short, practical hair, the kind of haircut that spoke of hospital stays and medical practicalities rather than fashion choices, of priorities that had shifted dramatically from normal life concerns. She was the source of the singing, her hand gently stroking the boy's forehead as she tried to maintain the melody, despite the obvious strain in her voice, despite the exhaustion that radiated from every line of her body. The scene was so intimate, so private, that Tyson felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. He started to step back, to give this family their moment and find his way back to his own world of training schedules and media obligations when the steady rhythm of the heart monitor suddenly changed. The measured beeping that had provided a reassuring backdrop became erratic, then dissolved into a sharp, continuous alarm that cut through the air like a siren, shattering the peaceful moment. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Footsteps thundered down the corridor as medical staff responded to the emergency with practiced urgency. Nurses in colorful scrubs rushed past Tyson, followed by a doctor still pulling on latex gloves, her face set in the determined expression of someone who had fought this battle many times before. They flooded into room 214, their movements efficient and practiced, but Tyson could see the urgency in their faces, the subtle signs of concern that spoke of a situation balanced on a knife's edge. Instead of retreating as any reasonable person would, as protocol and common sense demanded, Tyson found himself frozen in place, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. Through the now wide-open door, he watched the medical team work around the small bed with choreographed precision. The mother had been gently but firmly moved aside, her face a mask of controlled terror as she watched strangers fight for her son's life, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The boy, Elliot, he heard someone call him urgently, was conscious but frightened, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. His eyes darted around the room, wide with confusion and fear that no child should ever have to experience, until they landed on Tyson's imposing figure in the doorway. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their gazes locked across the chaos of medical intervention. Without thinking, driven by an instinct he didn't understand but couldn't ignore, Tyson, stepped into the room. The medical team was too focused on their work to notice the heavyweight champion's presence, their attention entirely consumed by the crisis at hand. But the mother looked up, surprise flickering across her exhausted features as she registered the famous face that had appeared in their darkest moment. Tyson moved to the foot of the bed with surprising grace for such a large man, his massive hands reaching out to gently hold the boy's small feet through the hospital blanket. It was a gesture born of pure instinct, the same protective impulse that had driven him to shield his own children from nightmares and fears, the paternal instinct that transcended fame and accomplishment and reduced everything to its most basic human element. "You're all right, little man," he whispered, his Liverpool accent soft with genuine concern, his voice cutting through the medical chatter. "Just breathe with me, yeah? In and out, just like that." The effect was almost immediate and completely inexplicable. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor began to slow, finding its rhythm again like a metronome returning to tempo. The medical team exchanged glances, filled with professional bewilderment, their practiced efficiency giving way to something approaching wonder. The crisis was passing, but none of them could explain why, and in their years of medical training, unexplained recoveries were rare enough to warrant attention. Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending pediatric cardiologist, looked from her patient to the unexpected visitor and back again, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. In 15 years of practice, she had seen many things, miraculous recoveries and heartbreaking losses, but this was beyond her medical training. The boy's vitals were stabilizing, his breathing becoming less labored, and the only variable that had changed was the presence of this gentle giant at the foot of the bed. The mother, Katrina Greenwood, felt tears of relief mixing with confusion as she watched her son's face relax for the first time in days. The fear in Elliot's eyes was being replaced by something else, curiosity, maybe even comfort, as he studied the famous face that had appeared in his room like some kind of guardian angel summoned by desperate prayer. As the immediate crisis passed and the medical team began to disperse, their emergency protocols winding down but their curiosity peaked, Tyson realized he had become part of something extraordinary, something that transcended his celebrity status and athletic achievements. This wasn't a photo opportunity or a charity visit arranged by his management team. This was raw, unfiltered human connection in its purest form, stripped of pretense and publicity. The following morning found Tyson Fury sitting in his sprawling Morecambe home, staring at his coffee as it grew cold on the kitchen table. Sleep had been elusive after yesterday's encounter, his mind replaying the scene in room 214 over and over. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw young Elliot's face, the fear giving way to trust, the small hand that had reached out to touch his fingers before the medical team had finished their work, the way the boy's breathing had synchronized with his own whispered encouragements. His wife Paris noticed his distraction over breakfast, watching as he pushed scrambled eggs around his plate without eating, his usual hearty appetite completely absent. "You've been quiet since yesterday. Everything all right? You're not usually this contemplative after interviews." Tyson set down his mug, considering how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself, something that felt too personal and profound to reduce to casual conversation. "I met a kid yesterday in the hospital. Wasn't supposed to be there, just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right place at the right time. And I think I need to go back. I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm supposed to be there." By afternoon, Tyson had contacted the hospital administration, this time through proper channels rather than accidental wandering. He explained his desire to visit young Elliot Greenwood, not as a celebrity making a publicity appearance for social media content, but as someone who had unexpectedly become part of the boy's story and wanted to see it through to whatever conclusion awaited. Dr. Chen met him in the corridor outside room 214, her professional demeanor softened by genuine curiosity about this unusual situation. She was a slight woman, whose compact frame belied the strength required for her job, her demeanor carrying the weight of difficult decisions and countless nights spent fighting for children's lives in situations where medicine reached its limits. "Mr. Fury, I want to be direct with you," she said, her voice professional but not unkind, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that spoke of careful consideration. "Elliot has a severe cardiomyopathy. His heart muscle is diseased and weakening. Despite our best efforts, all our treatments and interventions, we're looking at palliative care at this point. His condition is terminal." She paused, searching for the right words to explain something that challenged her scientific worldview. What happened yesterday? I've been practicing medicine for 15 years and I can't explain it medically. There's no clinical reason why your presence should have stabilized his condition. Tyson nodded solemnly, his expression grave as he absorbed the reality of Elliot's situation. I understand. I'm not claiming to have any special powers or anything like that. I can't get him out of my head, you know. Maybe I can help somehow, even if it's just being there. His mother, Catriona, she's been living here essentially for the past 6 weeks, sleeping in that chair, barely eating, barely leaving his side except for brief trips home to shower and collect mail. She's devoted everything to being with him through this. Dr. Chen gestured toward the room, her voice softening with admiration for the mother's dedication. If you think you can bring them some comfort, some moments of normalcy in this situation, then I support your visits. Inside room 214, the scene was much as Tyson remembered, but with subtle changes that spoke of a night's passage and the ongoing reality of serious illness. Katrina looked more tired, if that was possible, her eyes bearing the particular exhaustion that comes from maintaining vigilant hope in the face of medical certainty. Elliot seemed smaller against the white hospital linens, but when the boy saw Tyson enter, his face lit up with recognition and genuine delight. "You're the big man from yesterday," Elliot said, his voice thin but clear, carrying the directness that children possess before they learn social conventions. "Mum said you're famous. She showed me videos on her phone of you boxing. You're really strong." Tyson pulled up a visitor's chair, making himself as small as his 6'9" frame would allow, understanding instinctively that he needed to be at the boy's eye level for this conversation. "I might be a bit known, yeah, but right now I'm just Tyson. What's your name, son, though I heard the doctors calling you Elliot yesterday?" "Elliot James Greenwood. I'm 8 years old, and I like music and football, but Mum says I can't play football anymore because of my heart." The simple acceptance in the boy's voice, his matter-of-fact delivery of information that would devastate most adults, hit Tyson harder than any punch he'd ever taken in the ring. "But I can still listen to music, and I want to learn to play instruments." Here was a child facing mortality with more grace than most adults could muster, displaying a resilience that put Tyson's own struggles into perspective. The heavyweight champion had faced some of the world's most dangerous opponents, had overcome depression and addiction, but this 8-year-old was fighting a battle that required different kinds of courage. Catriona watched this interaction with careful attention, her maternal instincts evaluating every word and gesture. In the 18 months since Elliot's diagnosis, she had become expert at reading people's reactions to her son's condition. Some visitors brought pity that felt patronizing, others brought discomfort that made them cut visits short, and a few brought genuine care that made the burden slightly easier to bear. But this was different. This massive man, capable of devastating violence in the ring, was showing her son the same tenderness she'd seen him display with his own children in interviews and social media posts. "Your mum was singing yesterday," Tyson said to Elliot, his voice gentle and encouraging. "Beautiful song, really beautiful. Do you know it well?" Elliot nodded enthusiastically, his eyes brightening as they moved to safer emotional territory. "It's our song. Mom made it up when I first got sick and had to stay in hospital the first time. We sing it every night before I go to sleep, even when I'm scared or the machines are too loud." "Would you teach it to me?" Tyson asked, looking between mother and son with genuine interest. "I mean, if it's not too personal, I'd like to learn it." Catriona hesitated, her protective instincts warring with her son's obvious enthusiasm. The song was their private ritual, something sacred between them that had sustained them through the darkest moments of their journey. But looking at her son's eager face, seeing him more animated than he'd been in weeks, she found herself nodding slowly. "Stay beside me through the night," she began, her voice still carrying yesterday's weariness, but gaining strength as she continued, "until the morning brings new light. In your arms, I'm safe and warm, sheltered from each passing storm." The melody was simple but haunting, carrying emotional weight that spoke of countless repetitions in difficult circumstances. Tyson listened intently, his trained ear, honed by years of listening to crowd reactions and corner instructions in the chaos of boxing matches, picking up the melody's gentle rhythm and emotional nuances. When they finished, he attempted to repeat it, his deep baritone finding surprising gentleness in the simple tune, his voice carrying the same tenderness he used when singing to his own children. Elliot clapped his hands with delight, his face showing more animation than Katrina had seen in weeks. "You're good at singing. Are you good at boxing too? Mum showed me videos, but I want to hear from you." "I'm all right at boxing," Tyson grinned, his famous charm on full display. "But I think your mum's better at the important stuff than I am, the real important stuff, taking care of people." being brave when things are scary, staying strong when everything feels impossible. Over the next 2 hours, something remarkable happened that transformed the sterile hospital room into something approaching normalcy. Tyson found himself telling stories about his training, carefully edited for an 8-year-old audience, focusing on the funny moments and friendly rivalries rather than the violence. Elliot shared his dreams of learning to play violin, inspired by a music therapy session he'd attended the previous week, describing the beautiful sounds the therapist had made and his own desire to create something beautiful. When visiting hours ended and Tyson stood to leave, Elliot grabbed his hand with surprising strength for such a small, sick child. "Will you come back tomorrow?" the boy asked, his voice carrying hope and vulnerability in equal measure. Tyson looked at Katrina, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her expression conveying gratitude and cautious hope. "If you want me to, I'll be here. Same time tomorrow." As he left the hospital that evening, Tyson made a phone call to his manager, cancelling a non-essential media appearance scheduled for the following week. Some things, he was beginning to understand, were more important than maintaining his public profile and commercial obligations. That night he lay in bed thinking about Elliot's dream of playing violin, the boy's face when he described the music therapy session, the way his eyes had lit up when discussing creating something beautiful. By morning, he had formulated a plan that would surprise everyone, including himself, and would require him to step outside his comfort zone in ways that had nothing to do with boxing. 1 week later, the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital looked exactly the same from the outside, the same red brick facade, the same welcoming entrance, the same signs directing visitors to various departments. But something fundamental had shifted within its walls, a change so subtle yet profound that staff members found themselves smiling more, walking with lighter steps, and approaching their demanding jobs with renewed energy and purpose. Word had spread quietly through the hospital's corridors about the heavyweight champion's daily visits to room 214, visits that coincided with remarkable improvements not just in young Elliot's condition, but in the overall atmosphere of the entire pediatric ward. Nurses reported that other children were asking about the big singing man, and several families had mentioned feeling more hopeful after glimpsing the famous visitor in the hallways. Dr. Chen found herself documenting changes she couldn't medically explain in her detailed patient notes. While Elliot's underlying cardiomyopathy remained unchanged, his heart was still failing and the prognosis hadn't improved. His pain levels had decreased dramatically, his sleep patterns had improved significantly, and most remarkably, his episodes of cardiac distress had become less frequent and less severe. The boy was eating better, engaging more with staff and displaying an energy that seemed impossible given his medical condition. "It's not entirely unprecedented," she explained to her colleague, Dr. Reginald Morrison, as they reviewed Elliot's charts during their weekly case conference, surrounded by the familiar chaos of medical files and computer monitors. "We know that emotional well-being can significantly impact physical symptoms, especially in pediatric cases where children haven't developed the psychological barriers that adults use to separate emotional and physical experience. But this level of improvement, this dramatic change in quality of life markers, have you spoken to the family about it?" Dr. Morrison asked, his decades of experience making him curious about any factor that could improve a terminal patient's condition. "Are they attributing the changes to the visits?" Katriona mentioned that Elliot talks about Tyson constantly. It's become his primary topic of conversation. Apparently, he's been teaching the boy breathing techniques, simple meditation practices that he learned from his own training to manage anxiety and stress before big fights. Simple stuff, but incredibly effective for helping Elliot manage his fear and discomfort. What the doctors didn't know, what couldn't be captured in medical charts or clinical observations, was the extent of Tyson's emotional investment in the Greenwood family. Every afternoon, after completing his morning training sessions at his gym, he would arrive at the hospital with something new. Sometimes it was a story about his children's latest adventures. Other times, it was a simple magic trick learned from YouTube videos the night before, practiced until he could perform it smoothly enough to elicit delighted laughter from his young audience. But today was different, special in a way that would create memories to last far beyond Elliot's limited time. Tyson entered room 214, carrying a rectangular case that immediately caught Elliot's attention, his eyes widening with curiosity and anticipation. The boy had learned to find joy in small surprises, and Tyson's daily visits had become the highlight of his existence. "What's in there?" Elliot asked, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, his excitement palpable as he struggled to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. Remember you told me about wanting to learn violin? Tyson set the case carefully on the bed and opened it with ceremonial attention to reveal a child-sized violin, its wood gleaming under the hospital's fluorescent lights, the instrument beautiful enough to take anyone's breath away. Well, I thought we might give it a try. Start learning together. Katrina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes immediately filling with tears as she processed this extraordinary gesture. Tyson, you can't. This is too much. We could never accept something so expensive. It's not new, Tyson said quickly, though the instrument looked pristine and professionally maintained, clearly chosen with expert care. My mate has a music shop downtown, said this one needed a good home, needed someone who would appreciate it properly. It was a gentle lie told with the best intentions. Tyson had spent the previous afternoon at Forsyth's music shop in Manchester's city centre, working with the owner and a violin expert to select an instrument that would be perfect for a young beginner. They had discussed wood quality, string tension, and size specifications with the dedication of professionals preparing for a concert performance. The cost was irrelevant. Seeing Elliot's face light up with wonder and possibility was worth any price. Over the next hour, Tyson helped Elliot hold the small violin properly, his large hands guiding the boy's fingers to the correct positions on the neck, teaching him how to hold the bow with proper technique. Neither of them had any formal training. Tyson's musical education consisted primarily of listening to his wife's classical music collection, but they approached the challenge with the same determination and patience that Tyson brought to mastering new boxing combinations. The sounds they produced were far from musical, but Elliot's laughter filled the room as he struggled with the bow, creating squeaks and scratches that would have made a professional musician wince, but brought tears of joy to his mother's eyes. Every imperfect note represented hope, possibility, and the simple pleasure of learning something new despite circumstances that could easily justify despair. Katrina watched through tears that mixed sadness with overwhelming gratitude, witnessing her son more animated and alive than he'd been since his diagnosis. This wasn't just music instruction, it was a master class in maintaining humanity and finding joy in the darkest circumstances. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unusual sounds emanating from room 214 and curious about this latest development in Elliot's care. What she witnessed challenged every assumption she held about hospital protocol and traditional patient care. Here was one of the world's most famous athletes, sitting cross-legged on a hospital floor like a patient teacher, gently correcting finger positions and offering encouragement for every small improvement. "Don't mind us, Doc," Tyson called out when he noticed her presence, his voice cheerful and completely unself-conscious about being discovered in such an undignified position. "We're just making a bit of noise, learning as we go." "Actually," Dr. Chen said, stepping into the room with purposeful energy, "I wanted to talk to you about noise, about music specifically, and about something the hospital administration has been discussing." She went on to explain a conversation she'd had with the hospital's board of directors, department heads, and senior staff members. Tyson's visits hadn't gone unnoticed by hospital leadership, and the positive impact on not just Elliot, but other children in the ward, had been remarkable. Staff had reported improved morale, and several families had mentioned feeling more hopeful. "We'd like to propose something unprecedented," Dr. Chen said, her voice gaining excitement. "A comprehensive music therapy program. Nothing formal or publicity-driven, just more of this." She gestured at the scene before her, the famous boxer and the sick child sharing a moment of pure human connection through music. Tyson looked at Elliot, who was still clutching his violin with reverence. "What do you think, mate? Want to help other kids learn music?" "Could we really?" Elliot asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Could I help teach other kids?" What followed was a conversation that would transform the children's ward. Tyson committed to funding a comprehensive music therapy program, complete with instruments, qualified instructors, and a dedicated space where children could escape their medical reality through creative expression. But the most profound moment came later that evening. Elliot had fallen asleep holding his violin, a peaceful smile on his face. Katrina sat beside his bed, tears streaming down her face. "He's been asking me if he's going to die," she whispered to Tyson. "For months I haven't known what to say, but today he asked me if he'll have time to get good at violin, if he'll be able to teach other kids before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Tyson gently squeezed her shoulder. "Hope's a powerful thing, Katrina. Sometimes it's the best medicine we've got." 2 months later, the Tyson Fury Music Therapy Wing opened at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. Elliot performed a simple melody on his violin at the ceremony. His rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" was far from perfect, but it was performed with the confidence of a child who had learned that his life had value and meaning. Dr. Chen wiped away tears as she watched her patient and the heavyweight champion prove that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes the most powerful treatment isn't found in a pharmacy, but in the simple act of one human being refusing to let another face their darkness alone. Tyson Fury had entered room 214 by mistake, a wrong turn that could have been forgotten. Instead, he had found something that would change him forever, the understanding that true strength isn't measured by victories in the ring, but by the courage to be vulnerable and lift others up. As Elliot played his final note, the applause wasn't just for his musical achievement, but for the extraordinary journey that began with a wrong turn and led to a profound lesson about the healing power of human connection.